The great hall of the Galactic Council was full of noise and movement. Hundreds of aliens from different worlds walked between the tall pillars of white stone. Their voices mixed together in a strange song of languages that no single translator could fully understand. Flags of 100 empires hung from the ceiling, and the light from distant stars came through the massive windows. Dots. Sergeant Daniel Carter stood near the entrance with his hands behind his back. He wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's Diplomatic Protection Unit. His eyes moved slowly across the room, watching everything. He had been a soldier for 12 years, and he had learned to notice small details that others missed. "Stay sharp," said Lieutenant Amy Dawson through his earpiece. "The ambassador is making his rounds. Keep visual contact." "Copy that," Daniel replied quietly. He watched Ambassador Marcus Cole shake hands with a tall creature that looked like a blue insect. The ambassador smiled and nodded, playing the game of politics that Daniel never fully understood. His job was simple: keep the ambassador alive. Everything else was not his concern. But today felt different. There was something strange in the air. The alien diplomats kept looking toward the eastern entrance. Their conversations would stop for a moment, then continue. In whispers, Daniel had seen fear in many forms during his years of service. He recognized it now in the way these powerful beings held themselves. "What's going on?" he asked through the earpiece. "You haven't heard." Amy's voice was tight. "Princess Vexura is coming. She's claiming her father's seat on the council." Daniel knew the name. Everyone in the galaxy knew the name. The Princess of Kith, the daughter of Destruction, the Mind Killer. She had many titles, and none of them were kind. The story said she could destroy a person's mind with a single thought. They said she had killed hundreds, maybe thousands, without ever touching them. Her father, the old Emperor of Kith, had kept her locked away in a palace, hidden from the galaxy like a weapon too dangerous to use on. Now he was dead, and she was here. The eastern doors opened and the entire hall fell silent. Daniel watched as a figure walked through the entrance. She was smaller than he expected. Her skin was pale purple, and her hair was long and silver, falling past her shoulders like water. She wore a simple black dress with no jewelry or decoration. Her eyes were large and dark, and they looked straight ahead as she walked. No guards walked with her, no servants followed behind. She was completely alone. Daniel watched the reaction of the crowd. Diplomats stepped back as she passed. Some turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction. Group of important-looking aliens near the center of the room suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. One figure did not move. King Thorax of the Velen Empire stood in her path with his arms crossed. He was massive, nearly 8 feet tall, with green scales and 4 arms. His people were known as warriors, and Thorax was known as the loudest voice in the council. "So the monster shows her face," Thorax said. His voice was deep and carried across the silent hall. Princess Vexura stopped walking. She looked up at him with those dark eyes, and for a moment Daniel thought he saw something flicker in her expression, pain perhaps, or exhaustion. "I am here for my father's seat," she said. Her voice was soft and clear. "Nothing more. You should not be here at all," Thorax replied. "You are not a diplomat. You are a weapon, an uncontrolled weapon that could kill everyone in this room with a thought." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Daniel saw heads nodding in agreement. I have never harmed anyone who did not. Threaten me first, Vexor said. Lies. Thorax pointed one of his 4 fingers. At her you have killed hundreds. Thousands, your own people fear to speak. Your name, Vaxer did not respond. She simply walked around him and continued toward the seats at the far end of the hall. Thorax's face twisted with anger. But he did not follow, even he was not brave enough to push further. Daniel watched her take a seat in the far corner of the hall. She sat alone in a section meant for 20 representatives. No one sat within 50 ft of her. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the floor. Carter, what are you looking at? Amy's voice came through the earpiece. Nothing, Daniel said. But that was not true. He was looking at something he had not expected to see. The most feared being in the galaxy sat alone like a child who had been told she was not welcome at a party. Her shoulders were slightly bent. Her hands were pressed tightly together. She was not angry. She was not dangerous. Thought she was lonely. The rest of the day passed slowly. Daniel followed the ambassador through countless meetings and introductions. But his eyes kept returning to the corner where Vassara sat. She never moved. She never spoke to anyone. Occasionally, a diplomat would glance in her direction, then quickly look away. When the evening came, the hall began to empty. Diplomats returned to their ships and quarters. Ambassador Cole shook Daniel's hand and thanked him for his service before heading to his private suite. Daniel should have returned to his quarters as well. He should have eaten dinner, checked his equipment, and prepared for the next day. Instead, he found himself walking toward the observation deck on the upper level. He did not know why. Something pulled him there. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was something else entirely. The observation deck was a large room with transparent walls that looked out at the stars. It was meant for quiet reflection, and at this hour it was empty, but almost empty. Vexera stood near the window with her back to him. The light of distant galaxies painted her silver hair with colors of blue and gold. Her reflection in the glass showed her face clearly. She looked tired, so very tired. You should leave, she said, without turning around. If you stay near me, bad things might happen. Daniel stopped walking but did not retreat. What kind of bad things? I might destroy your mind by accident. Her voice was flat, as if she was reading from a script she had memorized long ago. That is what I do. That is what everyone believes. Do you believe it? For the first time she turned to look at him. Her dark eyes were wide with surprise, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. It does not matter what I believe, she said. Daniel took a step closer. I think it does. She stared at him for a long moment. Her expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something that might have been hope. But then the walls came back up and her face became cold. Again, leave, she said. I am warning you. Daniel did not move. He simply looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn through a 100 battles. His heart was steady. His breathing was slow. My name is Daniel Carter, he said. I'm part of Earth's security team. I know what humans are, she replied. Small, weak, short lives. You should not waste what little time you have standing near a monster. Daniel smiled slightly. I've met a few monsters in my time. You don't look like any of them. Vex did not know how to respond to That she turned back to the window and said nothing. Daniel remained where he was, watching the stars with her in comfortable silence. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if she would speak to him again. But for now, he simply stood beside her, unafraid, and for the first time in many years, Vexer was not completely alone. The next morning, Daniel found Vexer in the same place. She stood on the observation deck with her hands pressed against the glass, watching a cargo ship drift past the station. She did not turn when he entered, but he knew she was aware of his presence. "You came back," she said. "I did." "Why?" The question was simple, but her voice carried a weight of confusion that told him no one had ever chosen to return to her before. Daniel walked to the window and stood a few feet away from her, not too close, not too far, a respectful distance. "Because you looked like he could use some company," he said. Vexa finally turned to face him. In the morning light, he could see dark circles under her eyes. She had not slept well. Perhaps she never slept well. "You are not afraid of me?" she said. It was not a question. "No, you should be. Everyone is afraid of me. Even my own people run when they see me coming." She paused and her voice became softer. "They are right to run." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Why?" She looked at her own hands as if they were weapons she could not put down. "My powers are not like other psychics. I cannot control them completely. When I feel threatened, when I sense fear or hatred directed at me, my mind reacts on its own. It reaches out and it destroys. So your powers respond to the emotions of others." "Yes." She closed her eyes. "When I was young, a servant looked at me with disgust. Just a look, nothing more. My powers killed him before I even knew what was happening. Since then, everyone has feared me, and their fear makes me more dangerous. It is a cycle I cannot escape." Daniel considered this for a moment. "What about right now? Do you sense any fear from me?" Vexra opened her eyes and studied him carefully. Her brow creased in confusion. "No, there is nothing. Your mind is calm like a still lake with no ripples. I learned that in the military." Daniel said, "When you face death enough times, you learn to control your fear. Fear causes mistakes. Mistakes get people killed. So I train myself to stay calm no matter what." "You have faced death many times." "More than I can count." Something shifted in Vexer's expression. The cold wall she kept around herself seemed to lower slightly. "You are strange for a human." Daniel smiled. "I get that a lot." Over the following days, Daniel found reasons to be near her. He volunteered for patrol routes that passed the observation deck. He took his meals at times when she was likely to be walking through the corridors. He never pushed too hard or stayed too long. He simply made himself available. Each time they met, their conversations grew a little longer. Vaxer told him about her childhood in the Palace of Kith, where she was kept in isolation for everyone's safety. She spoke of her father, who loved her but did not know how to help her. She described the loneliness of being treated as a weapon rather than a person. Daniel listened without judgment. He shared his own stories of difficult times. He told her about his first battle when he was so scared he could barely hold his rifle. He explained how he learned to master his fear through years of practice and discipline. "Fear is just a feeling," he said one evening as they watched a meteor shower through the observation deck windows. "Feelings can be understood. They can be managed." Maybe. Your powers work the same way, Vexor. Shook her head. I have tried to control them for 60 years. Nothing works, maybe. You've been trying alone for too long. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe you need someone to practice with, someone who won't react with fear, someone who can help you learn to stay calm even when others are not. Before Vexor could respond, a voice interrupted them. Sergeant Carter. Daniel turned to see Lieutenant Amy Dawson marching toward him with an angry expression. She stopped a few feet away and glanced at Vexor with obvious discomfort. A word. Sergeant. In private. Daniel nodded to Vera and followed Amy to the far side of the deck. She kept her voice low, but her tone was sharp. What do you think you're doing? Talking, Daniel said calmly. Talking to the most dangerous being in the galaxy. Do you have any idea what would happen if she decided to kill you? If she decided to kill the ambassador? Earth is new to this council. We can't afford to be caught in some political incident involving the Princess of Death. Her name is Vexor. Amy's eyes widened. I don't care what her name is. Stay away from her. That's an order. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said with respect, Lieutenant, I don't think she's as dangerous as everyone believes. I think she's been alone and afraid for so long that she doesn't know how to be anything else. That's not your concern. Your concern is protecting Ambassador Cole and representing Earth with professionalism, not making friends with galactic monsters. She's not a monster. Amy stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear any of this, but if you get yourself killed, I'll make sure they write something embarrassing on your grave. She turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone on the observation deck. He looked back at Vexor. She had not moved, but her shoulders seemed more tense than before. She had heard everything. You should listen to your commander, she said without turning around. I am not worth losing your career over. Daniel walked back to stand beside her. Let me decide what's worth what. You are a fool, Daniel Carter. Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool than a coward. Vexor turned to look at him, and for just a moment the walls around her dropped completely. He saw the person underneath the legend, a woman who had been hurt and isolated for her entire life, a woman who desperately wanted to believe that she could be something more than a weapon. Why? She whispered. Why do you keep coming back? Because I think everyone deserves at least one person who isn't afraid of them. She stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand. Then slowly the corners of her mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Neither of them knew that they were being watched. In a private chamber on the lower levels of the station, King Thorax sat with 3 other rulers around a dark table. Holographic images of Daniel and Vexor played on a screen before them. Human complicates things, said one of the rulers, a creature with too many eyes. One human is nothing, Thorax replied. We proceed with the plan. At the banquet tomorrow night, the princess dies, and anyone who stands with her dies as well. The others nodded in agreement. On the observation deck above, Daniel and Vexor continued to watch the stars together, unaware that their time of peace was running out. Later that night, Daniel was returning to his quarters when a thin figure stepped out of the shadows. He reached for his weapon but stopped when he saw the figure's face. It was an elderly alien, with pale purple skin and silver hair. Similar to Vexera, but much older. "Please," the figure said, "I mean no harm. I am Selig. I have served the princess since she was born." Daniel relaxed slightly but remained alert. "What do you want?" Selig looked around nervously, then stepped closer. "I want to thank you for showing kindness to her. You are the first person in decades who has treated her as something other than a curse. She deserves better than what this galaxy has given her." Selig's old eyes filled with tears. "Yes, she does." He paused, then grabbed Daniel's arm with surprising strength. "But I must warn you, there are those who wish her dead. Powerful beings who see her as a threat to their power. They are planning something. I can feel it. Do you know what?" "No, but I know this. When the moment comes, she will meet someone by her side who is not afraid. Someone who can anchor her when everything else falls apart." Selig looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "Can you be that person?" Daniel did not hesitate. "Yes." Selig nodded slowly, relief washing over aged features. "Then perhaps there is hope after all." He released Daniel's arm and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Daniel alone with a new weight on his shoulders. Whatever was coming, he would be ready. The grand banquet hall sparkled with lights from 1,000 floating crystals. Long tables covered in white fabric stretched across the room, loaded with food from every corner of the galaxy. Music played softly from somewhere above, and the air smelled of strange spices and sweet flowers. Daniel stood near the wall in his formal uniform. He watched the alien diplomats enter in their finest clothing and jewelry. They laughed and talked and pretended to be friends, even though he knew many of them hated each other. Behind closed doors, Ambassador Cole stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of interested aliens. He was explaining something about Earth's agricultural technology, his hands moving with enthusiasm. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. The ambassador truly believed in building bridges between species. Smile faded when Daniel noticed where Vexer was sitting. Her seat was at the very end of the longest table, as far from everyone else as possible. There were empty chairs on both sides of her, creating a bubble of isolation in the middle of the crowded room. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She looked like a statue at a party meant for living people. Daniel scanned the room for threats. He noticed King Thorax sitting at the head table with several other powerful rulers. They kept glancing at Vexera and whispering to each other. Their expressions were not friendly. He also noticed the servants moving through the crowd. Most of them carried trays of food and drinks, but a few moved with a different purpose. Their eyes were too sharp, their movements were too practiced. Daniel recognized the posture of trained fighters. Something was wrong. He touched his earpiece. "Lieutenant Dawson, are you seeing this?" Amy's voice came back immediately. "Seeing what?" "The servants. Some of them are moving like soldiers, not staff." There was a pause. "I see them now. Could be nothing. Extra security, maybe." "Maybe, but they keep looking at the Princess Carter. I told you to stay away from that situation. Just keep watching. Something feels off." He cut the connection and made his decision. Orders or not, he could not stand by and do nothing if Vexera was in danger. The banquet officially began when the Council chairman stood and gave a long speech about cooperation and peace. Daniel barely listened. His attention was split between the suspicious servants and Vexor's lonely figure at the end of the table. When the speech ended, King Thorax rose from his seat. The room fell quiet. Thorax was known for his loud opinions, and everyone wanted to hear what he would say. Friends and allies, Thorax began, his deep voice carrying across the hall. We gather here to celebrate our unity, our shared commitment to peace and prosperity. He paused and looked directly at Vexora. But can there truly be peace when a weapon of mass destruction sits among us? Can we trust in our safety when the mind killer walks our halls? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vexora did not react. She kept her eyes down and her hands still. Some say she has a right to her father's seat, Thorax continued, but I say that rights are earned through trust, through proving that you will not harm those around you. What has the Princess of Kith done to earn our trust? Nothing. She has only brought fear and death wherever she goes. Daniel's jaw tightened. He saw Vexor's hands begin to tremble slightly under the table. Perhaps she cannot help what she is, Thorax said with false sympathy. Perhaps she is simply a broken thing that should have been destroyed long ago. That was enough. Daniel pushed himself away from the wall and began walking across the hall. He did not run. He did not show any urgency. He simply walked with calm purpose toward the empty seats beside Vexora. The room noticed conversation stopped. Heads turned. By the time he reached the table, every eye in the hall was on him. Is this seat taken? He asked Vexora. She looked up at him with shock in her dark eyes. What are you doing? Sitting down for dinner. He pulled out the chair and sat beside her. The food looks good. Is that some kind of meat? The silence in the hall was so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. King Thorax's face twisted with rage. Human, how dare you insult this council by sitting with that creature? Daniel looked at him calmly. No insult intended, Your Majesty. I just prefer the seat. Better view of the stars. Ambassador Cole stepped forward, his face pale. Sergeant Carter returned to your post immediately. Daniel looked at the ambassador and made a choice that would change everything. I'm off duty as of now, sir. This is my personal time. Before Cole could respond, everything happened at once. 3 servants threw off their disguises and pulled weapons from beneath their clothes. They moved toward Vexora with deadly speed, their blades raised to strike. Daniel was faster. He grabbed the knife from the nearest attacker and turned it against him in a single motion. The assassin fell back with a cry of pain. Daniel was already moving to the second one, using his training to redirect the attack and send the creature crashing into a table. The third assassin was almost at Vexora. Daniel threw himself between them, taking the blade across his arm instead of letting it reach her. Pain shot through his body, but he ignored it. He grabbed the assassin's wrist and twisted until the weapon dropped. Stay down, he shouted as he forced the assassin to the ground. Around him, chaos erupted. Diplomats screamed and ran for the exits. Security forces rushed in from all directions. King Thorax was shouting or words, but no one was listening to him. Daniel looked at Vexora. She had not moved from her seat. Her eyes were wide and her whole body was shaking. He could feel something strange in the air around her, like static electricity before a storm. Her powers were fighting to activate. Vexura, he said softly, look at me. She turned her dark eyes to his face. The shaking continued, focus on my voice, Daniel said. He ignored the blood running down his arm and kept his tone calm and steady. You're safe, it's over, just breathe, I can feel their fear, she whispered. Everyone in this room is terrified of the attack of me. It's so loud I can't make it stop. Then, don't listen to them, listen to me. He reached out and took her trembling hands in his. What do you feel from me? She stared at him for a long moment. Slowly, the shaking began to fade, the strain, pressure in the air lightened. Nothing, she said with wonder, just calm, just peace. Hold on to that, let everything else fade away. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, the storm had passed, her powers had settled, security forces surrounded them. Lieutenant Dawson pushed through the crowd and looked at Daniel's wounded arm with a mix of anger and concern. You absolute idiot, she said. You could have died. But I didn't. The captured assassin was being dragged away by guards. He was screaming something in a language Daniel did not understand, but one of the translators nearby went pale. He says, King Thorax ordered the attack. Translator announced. He says they were paid to kill the princess and make it look like an accident. The hall fell silent again. All eyes turned to Thorax. The massive alien king's green scales had turned pale. Lies, these are the words of a criminal trying to save himself. Then you will not mind if we examine the evidence, said the council chairman coldly. Thorax opened his mouth to argue, but the guards were already moving toward him. He was trapped and everyone knew it. Daniel looked down at Vexor. She was still holding his hand, still anchoring herself to his. Calm. Why? She asked softly. Why did you risk your life for me? Daniel thought about the question. He thought about his training, his duty, his years of service, but none of those were the real answer. Because everyone deserves someone who isn't afraid of them, he said, and because some things are more important than my own life. Vexus stared at him as if he were the most confusing thing she had ever encountered. Then slowly she did something she had not done in decades. She smiled. It was small and uncertain, like a flower pushing through frozen ground, but it was real. Thank you, Daniel Carter, she said. You're welcome, princess. Around them the chaos continued as guards arrested conspirators and diplomats demanded answers, but in that small circle of calm, a soldier and a princess held hands and shared a moment of peace. And for the first time in her long and lonely life, Vexura felt something she had almost forgotten was possible: hope. The council chamber was built to hold thousands, but today it felt small. Every seat was filled with diplomats, rulers, and representatives from across the galaxy. They had come to witness the emergency tribunal called to address the assassination attempt. Daniel sat in the front row with his arm bandaged. Wound was not serious, but the medical team had insisted on treating it properly. He had refused to stay in the medical bay, choosing instead to be present for what was about to happen. Vexura sat alone in the witness section. She wore the same simple black dress she always wore, and her silver hair was pulled back from her face. Her expression was calm, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. She had never faced anything like this before. King Thorax sat in the defendant's box with armed guards on either side. His forearms were bound in energy restraints in his proud face had become twisted with anger and fear. He kept glancing at the other rulers in the chamber, looking for support, but no one would meet his eyes. The council chairman, an ancient creature with blue skin and wise eyes, called the tribunal to order. We are gathered to examine evidence related to the attack on Princess Vexora of Kith. The chairman announced 3 individuals have confessed to attempted assassination. Each has independently named King Thorax of the Velen Empire as the person who ordered the attack. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Thorax pulled against his restraints. Lies, he shouted. These criminals will say anything to reduce their punishment. I demand that their testimony be dismissed. The chairman raised a hand for silence. The testimony is supported by financial records showing large payments from your personal accounts to the attackers. It is also supported by communication logs retrieved from your ship's computer. Thorax's face went pale. Those records were falsified. Someone is trying to destroy me. That claim will be investigated, the chairman said, but first we will hear from the witnesses. The first witness was the head of station security. He described the attack in clinical detail, showing holographic recordings from the banquet hall. Daniel watched himself on the screen, moving to intercept the assassins. He had not realized how fast he had been moving. The second witness was one of the captured assassins. He repeated his confession, describing how Thorax had contacted him through intermediaries and offered a large sum of money for the princess's death. He said it would be easy. The assassin said he said no one would care if the weapon was destroyed. He said we would be heroes. Thorax jumped to his feet. You were supposed to kill her quietly. You were not supposed to get caught. You incompetent fools have ruined everything. The chamber fell silent. Thorax seemed to realize what he had said. His face shifted from rage to horror as he understood that he had just confessed in front of everyone. The chairman nodded slowly. Thank you for clarifying your involvement, King Thorax. Thorax sank back into his seat, defeated. The third witness was Daniel. He walked to the witness platform and stood at attention, facing the assembled council. Please state your name and position. The chairman said, Sergeant Daniel Carter, Earth Diplomatic Protection Unit. You were present during the attack. Please describe what you observed. Daniel spoke clearly and simply. He described noticing the suspicious servants, his decision to sit with Vaser, and his actions during the attack. He kept his voice steady and his words precise, just as he had been trained. When he finished, one of the council members raised a hand. Sergeant Carter, why did you choose to sit with the princess? It was not part of your duty. In fact, your superior officer ordered you to stay away from her. Daniel looked at the council member. Then he looked at Vexor. Then he looked at King Thorax, because someone had to. He said, I watched this council treat Princess Vera like a monster from the moment she arrived. I watched diplomats run from her in fear. I watched King Thorax insult her in public, calling her a weapon that should have been destroyed. He paused and let his words settle over the room. But when I actually spoke to her, I found a person, someone who has been isolated and feared her entire life, someone who never asked for the powers she was born with, someone who has been punished for being different. His voice grew stronger. The only monster I saw in that banquet hall was not the princess, it was the king, who ordered her death simply because he was afraid of what she might become. That is not justice. That is cowardice. The chamber was completely silent. Daniel could feel hundreds of eyes on him, but he did not look away from the council. Humans have a saying, he continued. We judge people by their actions, not by what others fear they might do. Vexora has never attacked anyone who did not threaten her first. But Thorax ordered an assassination simply because he was scared. Tell me, which one deserves to be called a monster? He stepped back from the platform. The silence continued for a long moment. Then Ambassador Cole stood up. The Earth delegation supports Sergeant Carter's statement, Cole said, his voice carrying across the chamber. We believe that Princess Vexor has been treated unfairly by this council. She came here to claim her rightful seat, and she was met with hostility, isolation, and attempted murder. This is not the behavior of a civilized galactic community. More murmur spread through the crowd. Some diplomats were nodding. Others looked uncomfortable. The chairman turned to Vexora. Princess, do you wish to address the council? For a moment Vexora did not move. Then, slowly she stood and walked to the center platform. Every being in the chamber leaned forward, some in curiosity, others in fear. Vexor closed her eyes. Daniel watched her take a deep breath, and he felt the strange pressure in the air that signaled her powers activating. The crowd shifted nervously. But then, incredibly, the pressure faded. Vexor had deliberately suppressed her abilities. She opened her eyes and spoke. All my life I have been treated as a weapon, a thing to be feared and controlled. I have spent decades alone because everyone was too afraid to come near me. I accepted this as my fate. I believed I was a monster, just as everyone said. She looked at Daniel. Then I met a human who was not afraid. He sat beside me when everyone else ran away. He talked to me like I was a person. He protected me when assassins came for my life, and he reminded me of something I had forgotten. Her voice grew stronger. I am not a weapon. I am a person. I have thoughts and feelings and hopes just like anyone else. My powers make me different, but they do not make me evil. I did not choose to be born this way, but I can choose how to live. She turned to face the full council. I offer peace to those who approach me with respect. I offer cooperation to those who treat me as an equal, but I warn those who come at me with fear and violence that I will defend myself, not because I am a monster, but because I am a person with the right to exist. She paused. Judge me by my actions, not by your fears. That is all I ask. Chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then one by one diplomats began to stand and applaud. The sound grew until it filled the entire chamber. Even beings who had avoided Vexora for years were on their feet. The chairman called for a vote. The result was overwhelming. King Thorax was stripped of his council seat and would face criminal charges for the assassination attempt. Vesor's right to her father's seat was officially confirmed. As the tribunal ended and beings filed out of the chamber, Vexora found Daniel in the crowd. Thank you, she said, for your words, for everything. Daniel smiled. You didn't need me up there. You spoke for yourself, but I would not have had the courage without you. She hesitated, then asked a question she had been thinking about since the attack. What happens now? You will return to your duties with the ambassador. We will go back to our separate lives. Is that what you want? Vexor looked at him for a Long moment, no, she admitted, for the first time in decades, I do not want to be alone. Then maybe you don't have to be. Daniel took a breath. What if I stayed as your personal guard, as your friend? Her dark eyes widened. You would give up your position with the Earth delegation. Earth can find another security officer, but you need someone who isn't afraid to stand beside you. Someone who can help you learn to control your powers, someone who sees you as a person, not a weapon. He shrugged. I happen to be available. Vexura did not know whether to laugh or cry. She settled for something in between. You are a very strange human, Daniel Carter, so I've been told. He grinned. Is that a yes? She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Yes, I would like that very much. They walked out of the council chamber together, side by side. For the first time, Vexura did not walk alone, and across the galaxy, beings began to whisper about the princess, who was no longer feared by one brave human warrior. 6 months had passed since the tribunal. The galaxy had changed in ways no one expected. Mex's ship moved smoothly through the stars, carrying her toward another diplomatic mission. The vessel was elegant but not grand, designed for travel rather than war. It suited her new life perfectly. Daniel stood on the bridge watching the crew work. They were a mixed group of species, some Kythian, some from other worlds. All of them had learned to respect their princess, and all of them had learned that the human standing beside her was not someone to underestimate. We'll arrive at the station in 2 hours, the navigator announced. Good, Daniel said. Make sure our security team is ready. This negotiation is important. He walked back to the private quarters where Vexura was preparing for the meeting ahead. She sat at a small table reading reports on a holographic screen. When he entered, she looked up and smiled. That smile still amazed him. 6 months ago she had forgotten how to smile. Now she did it almost every day. Any problems? She asked. None so far. The crew is ready. Our security is in place. He sat across from her. How are you feeling? Vexura considered the question. Nervous, she admitted. The Varan and the Telk have been fighting for 3 generations. They agreed to talk only because I offered to mediate. If I fail, thousands more will die. You won't fail. You sound very confident. I've watched you negotiate 5 peace agreements in 6 months. You have a gift for this. He smiled slightly. It turns out that being feared has some advantages. Neither side wants to make you angry. Beezer laughed softly. That is not the foundation I wanted for my diplomatic career. Maybe not, but it got them to the table. Now you can show them what you really offer. She looked at him with warmth in her dark eyes. You always know what to say. I try. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. So much had changed between them. What began as curiosity had grown into respect. Respect had grown into friendship, and friendship had grown into something neither of them had words for yet. Thought Daniel knew there were complications. He was human with a human lifespan. She was Kythian and would live for centuries. He was a soldier. She was a princess. The galaxy would never stop watching them, judging them, wondering about them. But none of that seemed to matter when they were together. The ship arrived at the neutral station on schedule. The Varan delegation was already waiting, their insect-like bodies tense with suspicion. The Telk arrived shortly after, their massive forms filling the corridor as they eyed their ancient enemies, both delegations, kept their distance from Vesera, old. Fears died hard, but they did not run. That was progress. The negotiations were difficult. The Varn blamed the Telk for starting the war. The Telk blamed the Varn for refusing to share resources. Both sides had long lists of wrongs that needed to be addressed before peace was possible. Ixal listened patiently to all of it. She asked questions. She acknowledged pain. She never took sides or passed judgment. Daniel watched from the corner of the room, ready to act if anything went wrong, but his presence was more symbolic than practical now. Everyone knew that attacking Vexora meant dealing with her human guardian. The first day ended without agreement. The second day was worse, with shouting and accusations flying back and forth. On the third day, the Telk delegation leader stood and announced they were leaving. This is pointless, he said. The Varn will never accept peace. They want only our destruction. Vexra stood as well. Wait. The Telk leader turned to look at her. Fear flickered in his eyes, but he did not move. I know what it is like to be seen as a threat, Vexra said. I know what it is like when others assume the worst about you before you have even spoken. For most of my life I accepted those assumptions as truth. I believed I was what they said I was. She walked toward him slowly. The room held its breath. Then someone showed me kindness when I expected only fear. They saw past what I could do to who I actually was. That single act of courage changed everything for me. She stopped in front of the Telk leader. He towered over her, but she did not seem small. What if you showed the Varn the same courage? What if you chose to see past their fear to what they might become? You might be surprised by what happens. The Telly leader stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel standing quietly in the corner. The human, the leader said slowly, he is the one who showed you kindness, yes. And he stays with you still, even knowing what you are. Daniel stepped forward. What she is, he said, is the reason your two peoples are talking instead of fighting. What she is someone who uses her power to help rather than harm. I've stood beside her for 6 months and have never met anyone more worthy of respect. The Telly leader considered this. Then, incredibly, he turned and walked back to the negotiating table. Perhaps, he said, we can try again. The Varn leader, who had been watching in silence, slowly nodded. Perhaps we can. The negotiations continued for 2 more days. Progress was slow but real. By the end, both sides had agreed to a ceasefire and a framework for future talks. It was not peace, not yet, but it was the closest they had come in 3 generations. As the delegations departed, the Telekar approached Vexer one last time. I came here believing you were a monster, he said. I was wrong. Thank you for showing me that. Vexer bowed her head. Thank you for giving me the chance. That night, Daniel and Vexera stood on the observation deck of her ship, watching the stars slide past as they traveled to their next destination. It had become their tradition, a quiet moment at the end of each mission. Word is spreading, Daniel said, about you. I mean the princess who makes peace instead of war. I could not do it without you. Sure you could. I just stand in corners and look intimidating. Vexro laughed and the sound was like music. You do much more than that, and you know it. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. The stars stretched out forever before them, endless possibilities waiting to be Explored, Daniel Vexura said quietly. Yes, when we first met you told me that. Everyone deserves someone who isn't. Afraid of them, she turned to face him. But I never asked you why you weren't. Afraid, truly. Daniel thought about the question. He thought about his training, his experiences, the battles he had survived, but none of those were the complete answer, because fear is a choice. He finally said, when I looked at you, I could have chosen to see the stories and the legends. I could have chosen to see a weapon or a monster, but I chose to see a person standing alone, surrounded by beings who wouldn't give her a chance. He met her eyes and I never regretted that choice, not once. Vexer a step closer. Humans have such short lives compared to my people. Have you thought about what that means? I will live for centuries, you will die someday. Yes, I've thought about it. He smiled gently, but I've learned not to worry too much about the future. Every moment we have is a gift. I'd rather spend those moments standing beside you than hiding from what might happen later. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cooler than his, but the touch was warm. Thank you, Daniel Carter, for everything. You're welcome. Vexra. They stood together as the ship carried them toward their next adventure. Behind them lay a trail of peace agreements and changed minds. Ahead lay challenges neither could predict, but they would face them together. The princess who was feared by all the kings in the galaxy, and the one brave human warrior who chose to stand by her side, and somehow against all expectations. That was more than enough. The stars continued to shine around them, endless and eternal, as their ship flew on into the unknown, not as a weapon in her guard, but as partners, as equals, as friends, and perhaps in time as something more. The galaxy had many stories of monsters and heroes, of wars and empires, but this story was different. This was the story of two people who chose to see past fear and found something worth protecting. It was a very human story, and that made it the best kind of story there was.